Donald Trump's heavily trailed phone call with Vladimir Putin.
Trump's 2.5 hours long call with Vladimir Putin has marked a key turning point in the Russia-Ukraine war.
President Zelensky said Vladimir Putin had already gone back on his promise made to Donald Trump not to attack Ukraine's energy infrastructure for 30 days.
The two leaders of major superpowers discussed several important issues, with a key focus on a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia.
I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end.
But is all as it appears to be? Well, I can assure you, there are much more sinister motives at play with this phone call than you can imagine. Let me tell you all about it.
We do want to update you on some breaking news. We knew that the call was going on with President Trump and Putin. That has wrapped up. It went over 2 hours.
The call between Trump and Putin took place on Tuesday and lasted over 2 hours. The results of this conversation have been a mixed bunch. Some significant talking points were a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, land concessions between the two warring countries, prisoner exchanges, and an ice hockey match. While all that seems like good news, there are many huge problems with these talks that only become evident upon a closer look. Let's first discuss the ceasefire agreement. Leading up to the Trump-Putin call, Ukraine had been pushing for a complete and unconditional ceasefire. Unconditional being a key point here.
You see, we accepted ceasefire unconditionally. So now it's important to get unconditional answer from Russian side to support U.S. proposal with regard of ceasefire.
Ukraine agreed to Trump's proposal all the way back on March 11th. And not just Ukraine, its European allies also demanded a ceasefire lasting 30 days at the very least. Seems like Trump went into the call with that proposal in mind. But all of it was quickly shot down. Putin is not ready to make any compromises whatsoever, choosing to play the negotiation games on his terms. Instead of a full ceasefire of all hostilities, he has only put forth a limited ceasefire agreement on energy infrastructures. Neither Russia nor Ukraine will attack the other's energy infrastructure for 30 days. Russia claims this will help progress towards a complete ceasefire over time. But did Putin do this in good faith? Well, kind of.
Today, for the first time in more than 3 years of war, Ukraine and Russia have both agreed to at least a partial ceasefire.
An energy infrastructure ceasefire is right now ideal for both countries. According to Zelensky last September, Russia destroyed nearly 80% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure through bombing. That is a lot. Ukraine needs its energy infrastructure to continue its efforts against Russia, and if Russia bombs it into oblivion, the war could be lost. Ceasing such attacks will mean Ukraine will have some time to build back up. As for Russia, this ceasefire comes as a huge relief as well. Ukraine has been conducting drone and missile strikes deep into Russian territory, targeting oil and gas facilities. This has been devastating for Russia since oil and gas have been a key source of revenue for Moscow fueling the war, especially with sanctions from foreign powers limiting its economy. Ukraine, which has been fighting at a disadvantage ever since the war started, was relying on these attacks to keep Russia on its toes. Now, that is no longer possible. The limited ceasefire will allow Russia to continue its war effort without having to worry about losing its main income source. All in all, Russia does come out on top in this, since it had more to lose from attacks on its energy infrastructures than Ukraine. But is that all there is to it? Certainly not. Russia is stalling, at least according to several experts. Putin is trying his best to keep the war dragging on, and his rejection of a complete ceasefire is a means towards that end. While a full ceasefire will be beneficial to Russia, giving Moscow a chance to strengthen its forces, rebuild as much as possible, and be ready in case negotiations break down once again, Putin knows Ukraine will get the same opportunity. And Russia will not allow that to happen, especially since Russian forces are trying to steamroll through eastern Ukraine right now. At the moment, the war is going in Russia's favor, with Russian forces occupying major territories and pushing Ukraine back in several places. A full ceasefire right now will allow Ukraine to regroup and fight back better afterwards, and Putin will not have it. He has an advantage, and he will push it as much as possible. With more land occupied, Putin will have better bargaining chips than Ukraine during peace talks. This could potentially give Russia major advantages, and quite a lot of land once the dust settles and the war ends. Despite the complicated nature of it all, Trump is showing all this off as a big win. In Mr. Trump's words, "We had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours." But was it really? This energy infrastructure ceasefire is off to a horrible start. Just hours after the Kremlin agreed to halt attacks, Russian forces attacked Ukraine with 150 drones, some of which targeted energy infrastructure. Ukraine too attacked an oil facility in Russia. So yeah, horrible start for sure. Both sides have violated the agreement almost instantly. And then we have the wording confusion. So according to Trump, he and Putin agreed on a ceasefire in energy and infrastructure. However, according to Putin, they agreed on a ceasefire in energy infrastructure. No "and" anywhere in there. What does that mean? Well, Trump's version covers energy infrastructure and other structures like bridges, ports, railways, and such things, whereas Putin's version just covers the energy infrastructure. Seems like Russia is running with its own version, with no halt on attacking critical infrastructure in Ukraine that is not energy-related. A simple wording misunderstanding, and a whole lot of consequences to accompany it. But that is not the only problem.
Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky has thanked Donald Trump for his continued efforts to bring about peace in Ukraine after the two shared a phone conversation this morning.
A main concern has been that Ukraine was not super involved in these talks, at least not as much as it should have been, considering it is one of the two main countries in the whole conflict. While the Biden administration had a policy of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, Trump has gone the exact opposite. To many, it seems like the fate of Ukraine is being discussed without Ukraine being at the table. Not only that, but European powers, heavily involved in the conflict one way or the other, have also been ignored completely in this meeting. And that is not going to sit well with anyone. As Zelensky put it, trying to negotiate without Ukraine, in my view, will not be productive. It is a matter of concern for Ukraine, since it puts Ukraine's importance in future negotiations in jeopardy. Russia will be more likely to negotiate only with the USA, ignoring Ukraine in the process, since the US is not providing a strong backing to Ukraine. Last we heard, Zelensky had proposed a complete ceasefire a week before the call between Putin and Trump. As Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said, "We expect the Russian side to unconditionally agree to this proposal. It is time for Russia to show whether it really wants peace." That, of course, did not happen. Then why did Zelensky agree to the inferior ceasefire agreement? Some experts say it is because Ukraine had no other choice.
You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way, so...
Only recently, Trump accused Zelensky of being not grateful enough for the help the U.S. has been providing, publicly dressing down the Ukrainian president in the White House, who had come to sign a mineral rights deal with the U.S., after which the U.S. ceased all U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing with Kyiv. Soon afterwards, Russia conducted a large-scale missile and drone attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which Trump first condemned and threatened with sanctions. But soon after backtracked and said anyone in Russia's position would be doing the same right now. Soon after, Trump decided to once again continue providing U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing to Kyiv, which it desperately needs. It is clear the pause in intelligence sharing by the U.S. really hurt Ukraine. And that plays into Trump's call with Zelensky, where he put forth what Putin and Trump had talked about. Zelensky agreed to the deal, and Trump described it as a very good telephone call. How much of a choice Zelensky had in this, that is up for debate. The Ukrainian president did describe the call as very good, positive, frank, and very substantive. He also said, "We believe that together with America, with President Trump, and under American leadership, lasting peace can be achieved this year on X." An optimistic outlook for sure. But hold on to that thought. Let me first tell you about the other major things Putin and Trump discussed in their call. There is the prisoner exchange agreement, which is great news coming out of the meeting. On Wednesday, both Ukraine and Russia exchanged 175 prisoners each. On top of that, Russia also returned 22 heavily wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical attention. According to Zelensky, these 22 soldiers were prosecuted by Russia for fabricated crimes. All in all, this prisoner exchange has been a token of goodwill from both sides. Let's hope that continues. And that is where the good news ends. You see, there is something weird about the Putin-Trump call. There are inconsistencies between what each side's reports was discussed on the telephone. The brief of the call from the White House is much shorter than the one from Russia. And turns out, the Russian version has a lot more conditions to it than what the White House has admitted. And not all of them seem directed at achieving peace. One of the major conditions Putin has put forward is that foreign military aid be completely ceased for Ukraine. So all the help Ukraine has been getting from the US, and possibly its European partners, Putin wants it all gone. There is more still. Putin has also demanded that the US stop sharing intelligence information with Kyiv. Now that will be a huge blow to Ukraine if followed through. Ukraine relies heavily on the US for intelligence information tracking Russian forces movement. And with that gone, the Ukrainian army will be a sitting duck, barely able to fight back against Russia, a country that already outmatches it tenfold in terms of military strength. This condition by Putin will also stop the import of weapons into Ukraine from foreign powers, leading to Ukraine's position getting even worse. In short, Putin has demanded Ukraine be left absolutely helpless if the world wants peace, talks to succeed. Another major demand by Putin is that Ukraine stop forced mobilization. This refers to the allegation that Ukraine is forcing men to enlist in the army and fight against Russia. Now these conditions alone make it seem like Russia is not at all serious about peace talks. A ceasefire bought at such a high price for the Ukrainians? No way Zelensky agrees to that. And really, should he? Putin is essentially asking Ukraine to surrender. Another condition put forth by Putin has been that whatever ceasefire deal is agreed upon, it must address the root problem of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. According to experts, this refers to the Ukrainian efforts to join NATO, which was a driving factor in why Russia invaded Ukraine in the first place. Putin basically wants Ukraine to give up on any hope of joining NATO. Lastly, Putin wants the peace talks to cover the legitimate interests of Russia in the area of security. Now, all these seem like unreasonable demands, but turns out these are being taken seriously. Trump administration has been super close to Russia, more so than any other recent administration. And that could lead to these demands coming into effect, especially since Trump has been talking directly to Russia with no direct involvement by Ukraine or European powers. On top of that, Putin is dead serious about these demands, and seems like he is not willing to agree to a ceasefire unless these are met. And now for perhaps the most useless negotiation that took place on the Trump-Putin call. They are arranging for an ice hockey match. Yeah, I know it sounds weird, but there is some meaning to it. Basically, Russia has been kicked out of international ice hockey competitions ever since the invasion of Ukraine. Seems like Putin misses those a bit too much, and Trump agrees. Both parties have agreed to hold ice hockey matches between their countries in the NHL and KHL. Why does it matter? Let me explain. The gesture is more symbolic than anything else. Russia and the USA have been pretty estranged since the invasion, and Russia has barely any allies internationally because of it as well. This match is a way to slowly bring Russia out of its isolation, just enough to keep the public interested in the possibility of peace. That or Putin just really, really loves ice hockey. back to serious business. According to the Kremlin, Putin was asked by Trump to ensure the safety and good treatment of the Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk. Kursk is a region in Russia which was recently invaded by Ukraine in an effort to grab more land before the peace talks could begin. This was a last-ditch effort for Zelensky to have more Russian land occupied so he could trade it for Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory during negotiations. But as Trump and Putin's talks of ceasefire were in progress, Russia struck back. Up to 70,000 Russian soldiers, alongside 12,000 North Korean soldiers, were sent to retake Kursk, and they succeeded in their mission. The 12,000 Ukrainian soldiers, the best of the best in the Ukrainian army, were driven back, constantly under attack. It was a close call, but most of the Ukrainian forces were able to retreat by a hair. And just like that, the hope of trading Kursk for occupied land has gone up in smoke. It was these soldiers Trump was talking about when requesting good treatment from Putin on their behalf. According to the Kremlin, Putin agreed, guaranteeing the lives and decent treatment of Ukrainian troops in accordance with Russian and international law if they surrender. Aside from that, both Trump and Putin emphasize the need to improve the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Russia. Both sides have raised hope for continued negotiations to achieve a more complete ceasefire. Potentially, we could be looking at a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea next, which could evolve into something greater and more peaceful. Once again, however, we are not sure if either Ukraine or European powers will be involved in these further correspondences and agreements. Both sides also pointed out that the money spent by Ukraine and Russia on the war is better off going to help their own people. On top of that, the White House also indicated that improving relationships between Russia and the U.S. will lead to economic deals and geopolitical stability once peace has been achieved. A bit of good news for the heavily sanctioned Russia. This could be a huge incentive for Russia to come to the negotiation table with more flexibility, since the isolation caused by the sanctions for other countries has severely affected Russia's economy. Now, there is one last thing discussed between Trump and Putin during their call, and it will have international consequences. Both leaders discussed the Middle East. Trump and Putin spoke broadly about the Middle East with a main focus on preventing future conflicts. Now, one thing I want to point out is how ironic that is. It is Russia talking about maintaining peace in the Middle East while currently at war with Ukraine. Anyways, both leaders discussed the need to stop the proliferation of strategic weapons in the Middle East to achieve said peace. They will engage with others to ensure the broadest possible application. The readout of the call from the Kremlin did not specifically say Israel, but Trump has made a clear-cut statement saying Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel, on which it seems Putin agrees. This is in line with Trump's previous statements claiming Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon and that there is a maximum pressure policy on the country to prevent it from getting one. Now, this may be a pickle for Russia. You see, while Putin has agreed with Trump's statements, it does not mean he is totally free from Iran's influence. After all, Russia did provide Iran with an air defense system, which Israel later destroyed. In exchange, Russia got thousands of Iranian-made drones and missiles which it used against Ukraine. So Russia has collaborated with Iran, and now it is agreeing that Iran should never be too powerful after providing Iran with a defense system recently. Yeah, politics are confusing. What the two superpowers have in store for the Middle East, no one is sure. While that is all that was discussed on the Putin-Trump call, there is one more thing I want to talk about, and that is the land concessions. Why? Because of the crucial role they will play in any peace talks and ceasefires going forward. As it stands, Ukraine has lost nearly 20% of its territory to Russia, and Russia wants to keep a lot of it. And since Ukraine's Kursk offensive has been a failure, Zelensky has no chips to bargain with in the hopes of getting that land back. The outlook is not good for Ukraine, and the U.S. agrees, it seems. Trump has shown doubt over whether Ukraine will ever be back to its 2014 borders, even if peace comes to be. He also stated that, some of that land will come back. According to Trump, Washington and Moscow have already started dividing up certain assets between Russia and Ukraine as part of a ceasefire deal. There are certain parts of Ukraine that Russia will very likely gobble up, some with USA's blessings. The main area that will become a part of Russia is the Crimea region. Russia had seized Crimea from Ukraine back in 2014 and annexed it. Despite the occupation, however, the region is recognized as part of Ukraine by most countries. That will likely change, however, since Russia will probably make Crimea a part of it through ceasefire and peace negotiations. According to sources, the Trump administration is already considering recognizing Crimea as Russian territory. Other nations will probably follow suit soon after, if that were to happen. As for the rest of the territories, we will only find out who gets to keep them once the peace talks start. With Zelensky barely having any bargaining chips, Ukraine barely has a chance, unless they are able to mount a huge offensive and grab some Russian land or take back some of their own. That leaves us with one very important asset to be discussed. I am, of course, talking about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine. This is the largest power plant in Europe, and currently it is under Russian occupation. Here is why that matters. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant provides electricity to nearly a quarter of Ukraine. Without it, Ukraine will have to look elsewhere to fulfill its energy needs. Not an easy task. And well, Ukraine has been given a deal to help get the plant back up and running by the US. Trump has suggested that the US could help run the plant with its electricity and utility expertise. Trump has also suggested that American ownership of those plants would be the best protection without directly pointing to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And Zelensky has agreed, saying, yes, if we can modernize it, invest money. This can be discussed, but we talked about only one station. When asked if the US can help rebuild the plant. And well, Zelensky cannot exactly say no, since the US is his last hope of getting the plant back. You see, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is pretty deep in Russian-occupied territory, so meaning it and keeping a military presence there is nearly impossible without first liberating the region, which as it stands, Ukraine has been incapable of doing. Moscow has also ignored Ukraine's calls to relinquish control of the facility. Ukraine and its allies have also urged Russia not to withdraw troops from the plant, raising warnings of nuclear safety risks. All such warnings have been ignored. So for better or for worse, right now US ownership is the best bet to get the plant back up and running, powering Ukraine. As for the US, this is in line with Trump's demand for rare earth minerals and other resources in return for all the help the US has been providing Ukraine in its war efforts. But now that the temporary ceasefire is in effect, will both countries follow it? As I already told you, hours after the call between Putin and Trump, both countries had already violated the agreement and attacked each other's energy infrastructure. There are still hopes, however, since there are good chances Ukraine and Russia will honor the ceasefire going forward, limited as it is. This is pretty much the first time since the war started that a ceasefire has been put into effect, so it is major progress on its own. There is also work towards coming up to a complete ceasefire, thanks to the USA's efforts. But it somewhat feels like it is just Russia and the US deciding others' fate on their own. It may just be me, but shouldn't Ukraine have been given an equal opportunity in these negotiations? Trump has said repeatedly that Ukraine has fewer cards to play than Russia, and it is also clear that the US seeks to maintain closer ties with Russia. Why else would it offer a way out after a peace deal has been struck in the form of economic deals with Russia? Meanwhile, the Trump administration has drawn a hard line on not aiding Ukraine for free, demanding rare earth minerals in return, and even bargaining for control over its nuclear power plants. To me, that does not look like equal treatment. Sure, equal treatment may not always be possible, seeing as how Ukraine is in a bad position right now, and Putin is in no mood for compromises, but shouldn't the US at least try? These are all questions we should be asking ourselves. Regardless, things look hopeful, and who knows what the future might hold for Ukraine and Russia. Let's hope that the ceasefire holds up, fragile as it has been due to violations by both countries. And with that, this video comes to an end. I want your thoughts in the comments down below. Who do you think is in the right? Is Russia being fair? Is Trump being fair? And does Ukraine deserve its isolation? Let me know all that in the comments section. And while you are at it, be sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe for more interesting content like this coming your way. Until next time, goodbye and stay safe.